Victory Within. In the heart of a vast kingdom, nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, there lived two warriors whose bond was as unbreakable as the strongest steel. Kale and Kale, they were called, and together they formed an unstoppable force on the battlefield. For years, they had fought side by side, their swords flashing in the sunlight as they vanquished enemy after enemy. Kale was known for his unmatched skill with the sword and his unyielding courage, while Kale possessed a cunning intellect and a fierce loyalty to his friend. Together, they were invincible, or so they thought. As they rode into battle on that fateful day, the air was charged with tension, the sound of drums echoing in the distance. Their enemies, a fierce horde of invaders from a neighboring kingdom, outnumbered them tenfold. But Kale and Kale were undaunted, their spirits unbroken as they charged into the fray. The battle raged on for hours, the clash of swords and the screams of the dying filling the air. Kale and Kale fought with a ferocity that bordered on the divine, their bond as brothers in arms driving them forward, even as their enemies closed in around them. But then, in the heat of battle, tragedy struck. A horde of enemy soldiers descended upon them, overwhelming them with their sheer numbers. Kale, ever the protector, threw himself in front of Kale, his body becoming a shield against the onslaught. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as Kale watched in horror, unable to reach his friend in time. And then, with a deafening roar, the enemy horde descended upon them, their weapons flashing in the sunlight as they struck blow after blow. When the dust finally settled, Kale found himself kneeling beside his fallen friend, his heart heavy with grief. Kale lay motionless on the ground, his eyes closed and his breath shallow. In that moment, Kale knew that he had lost more than just a friend. He had lost a part of himself. As he cradled Kale's lifeless body in his arms, Kale felt a rage unlike anything he had ever known. He wanted nothing more than to unleash his fury upon the enemy that had taken his friend from him, to exact vengeance for the life that had been stolen so cruelly. But as he looked down at Kale's peaceful face, a sense of calm washed over him, a calm that he knew could only come from within. In that moment, Kale realized the true meaning of the sage's words. It is better to conquer yourself than to win 1,000 battles. Determined to find solace and understanding, Kale remembered a time before the battle when he and Kale had come across the wise sage who dwelled in the mountains beyond the kingdom's borders. The sage had imparted upon them words of wisdom, but in the chaos of battle, Kale had forgotten their true significance. Through treacherous terrain and unforgiving wilderness, he pushed forward, his determination unwavering despite the obstacles that lay in his path. After days of arduous travel, Kale finally arrived at the foot of the mountain where the sage was said to reside. With each step he took towards the summit, he felt a sense of anticipation building within him. And when he finally reached the summit and came face to face with the sage, he knew that his journey had been worth every hardship he had endured. The sage spoke words of wisdom that echoed in Kale's soul, words that resonated with a truth that he had long sought but never fully understood. It is better to conquer yourself than to win 1,000 battles, the sage said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of knowledge. For when you conquer yourself, the victory is yours, and yours alone. It cannot be taken from you by angels or by demons, heaven or hell. In that moment, as Kale gazed into the sage's eyes and saw the reflection of his own inner turmoil, he knew that he had found the answer he had been searching for. True victory, he realized, was not found on the battlefield, but within the depths of his own being. And as he embraced this newfound understanding, he felt a sense of peace wash over him, a peace that he knew would stay with him for all eternity. Returning to the village, Kale carried with him the memory of his fallen friend, a constant reminder of the sacrifices made in the pursuit of victory. And as he stood before Kale's grave, the sword that had once been his most prized possession felt heavy in his hand. With tears streaming down his face, Kale knelt before the grave and buried the sword deep in the earth, a silent tribute to the friend he had lost and the lessons he had learned. And as he stood up, a weight seemed to lift from his shoulders, replaced by a sense of peace and acceptance. For in that moment, Kale knew that true victory had been achieved, not through the conquest of others, but through the conquest of himself. And as he turned away from the grave and walked back towards the village, he carried with him the knowledge that the greatest battles were not fought with swords and shields, but with courage and compassion, and that the truest victory of all was the victory over one's own demons. Thank you for listening to this tale. May it inspire you to approach life's challenges with compassion and wisdom. Our project's aim is to help you grow spiritually and mentally. Share this story to spread hope and compassion. Follow us to find your inner peace.